Hey everyone, and welcome into another episode of Understanding CBD. I'm your host, Stephen Wallman from Wallman's Apothecary. If you haven't seen before, we do very high-end tinctures with very professional labeling, full cannabinoid terpene profiles on each bottle. We have a QR code that takes you to our full panel, and what that means is that we've tested it for everything that could be harmful: pesticides, heavy metals, mold, mildew, mycotoxins, any residual solvents from any extraction methods. And you can be sure it's safe. And what I always like to say is what I say is in the bottle's in the bottle. So you really have a trusted source. Now today, understanding CBD is our topic, is our brand. But it started because most people don't understand CBD. I didn't understand CBD when I started to get into using cannabis for medicinal purposes. And when I went to the dispensaries, a lot of people there actually didn't really know too much about CBD or really have the products available. And today we have a cannabis pharmacist with us today, not only a cannabis pharmacist, but an MBA. And his name is Joseph Friedman. And he's going to give us an inside look into what it takes and everything about running a professional cannabis dispensary. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to Joseph Friedman. Hey,
Hello,
Joseph.
Stephen. Hi, nice to be here, and thanks very much. I look forward to this.
Yeah, so I know we've had it scheduled a while back, so I'm glad to finally meet you and talk to you in person or virtually, whatever this is, but interact live. Right. And go through some of the questions that I have about running the dispensary and how that can be beneficial for our listeners and viewers. But before we get into it, you really have a unique background to bring to the table and really bring a lot to the cannabis industry. Can you give us a little bit of a background on how what you do, what makes you special, and how you got into the cannabis business?
Well, back in 2013, I was aware Illinois was going to be legalizing medical cannabis. There's going to be a program, and so what I did is, I reached out and I put together a team. We submitted applications, and by the end of 2015, we were successful with our application, and we opened up probably the most unique dispensary in the state of Illinois. What was unique about it, it was the only dispensary in the state of Illinois that actually had full-time professionals on staff all the time. We had pharmacists, we had a hospice nurse. And in Illinois, at the time that we opened, we had a governor who wasn't a fan of the program, and there's only 3,000 patients, in the entire state of Illinois. Compare that to Pennsylvania that had 30,000 on their day one. Wow. So what was interesting about that is the dispensary just north of us, when they opened, they were the second dispensary to open up. They had 400 people at their door on day one. 45 days later, we had 3 people at our door on day one, and we had nobody at our door on day 2. It was a very spotty start, but I think
entrepreneur, my heart as an entrepreneur, I can feel it.
Well, it was, we had to cut hours, we had to cut staff. I mean, we had to just keep our door open, and I think what happened over the course of the next 6 months to a year is people started to realize that we were vastly different from all the surrounding dispensaries, as people started to come to us because they were getting the professionalism and the hand-holding that they weren't getting in other dispensaries.
Now, do you think that, I guess the question is, what percentage of people that show up at a dispensary already know what they want and why they're there versus how many people really need some guidance?
Well, I would like to break that down into, the older patients that maybe, smoke some pot in the 60s. They really were sort of in this new environment. They didn't know what to ask for, what to do, but they did have a healthcare problem. So we would guide them through that. Now, the other group of people were people that were cannabis wise. And so they've been doing it all along, and they just came to a place that actually offered it legally now. And so we tried to offer up consultations to every patient that walked in the door, every new patient. I'd say 98% of the people that walked in the door wanted to sit down with a pharmacist and to discuss, their goals of therapy and the other things that we would do on this first-time consultation.
Wow, that's great. That's really cultivating a good, customer base that's aware. And, my experience has been a little bit different with the dispensaries in Maryland.
Mhm.
Each medical dispensary has a requirement of a medical director, and from what I understand, no one really uses them. So they're just really getting their advice from the bud tenders. As an entrepreneur, I'd love to ask you, when you're selecting a location for a dispensary, what sort of criteria are you looking for? Are you looking at demographics? Are you looking at certain types of real estate per se? Is it a certain anchor tenant that you want to be near? What are some of the criteria that you're looking for when you look for a location?
Well, when this industry first began in Illinois, we were very restricted on the location where we can go. Many communities did not want it. And so, we were restricted to industrial areas, not commercial areas, but industrial areas that it would allow us. And we were restricted also by the landlord, who would not allow this or allow it. And so, and then I wanted to also comment on the term bud tender that you used. I never allowed or used that term in our dispensary. We always used product specialist. I think bud tender, and I think you had that on a podcast yesterday, who also didn't think that that was very complimentary as far as the employees that work in dispensaries. So, getting back to your question, we were restricted, but we did find a place in a northern suburb of Chicago where it was light industrial, and people had to find us, and we had all kinds of maps and information on our website on how to find us.
So it wasn't necessarily just the regulators that said where you could be. You also had to deal with landlords.
Exactly.
That may not. And so you weren't going to be able to select like a prime heavy traffic area.
No, we basically selected what we could get, and we kept our fingers crossed. I mean, it really wasn't a bad location. It wasn't hard to find, but we did have people that walked in and said, "Wow, I really had a hard time finding this." But once you find it once, you're good to go.
Yeah. So regulations play a role in marketing and advertising. How were you able to get the message out that you were there and available to see patients? What kind of tools did you have available to you?
Well, we did a lot of organic marketing. I did a lot of speaking engagements. We put on a couple of cannabis expos where we were allowed to do that, and we advertised. And through that effort of doing presentations in senior living facilities and Rotary clubs and things like that, we got the word out about who we were and what we were doing, and how we were different.
All right. Now, when you're staffing a dispensary, because you mentioned that's one of the things that made it unique, you had professionals there. And when you put up, "Hey, we're a dispensary, we're hiring," you get every stoner that's dream is to work at a dispensary. What sort of characteristics did you look for when you're filtering through someone that would be qualified to be a product specialist?
Well, that's a great question. And we had a very unique hiring process, which, as I look back, I go, wow, that was unique. We didn't think it was unique at the time. What we did is we put out something in the paper or something on Indeed or something like that we were a cannabis dispensary. We were opening at a certain date. And if you're interested, please send us your resume. And so we got about 100 resumes. And of those 100 resumes, we selected maybe about 20 or 30. And what we did over a day and a half is we rented out an office space, and we had our consultant from Colorado come in, great guy. I and my one good partner, talked, and gave presentations. And what we did is we observed these people for a day and a half, how interactive they were, what kind of questions they asked. And of that 20 to 25 people, we selected about 10 or 15 as far as the employees that we would hire.
Wow, that is a pretty thorough interview process, but you really got to get to see these people in action versus, just that one little short time you talk to them.
Exactly. And then, when we started, we had all these people on board, and I'm very proud for the several years that we operated our dispensary. We had practically zero turnover. So really that helped to make the right choice.
Yeah, that was my last question. That was going to be my follow-up question, which was turnover, because I hear about a lot of turnover in the dispensaries. especially for the role of that, we call bud tenders, product specialists. There are some different creative names, but it's a stressful position. Did you find that the people as product specialists would get frustrated or had a lot of pressure on them to perform?
No, we had a great environment for working. I mean, I wasn't above cleaning a toilet, being the CEO, and and at the end of a good day, we would just have this big kumbaya, like, hey, and so everyone was in it, and then we weren't necessarily paying people well. I mean, I certainly didn't pay myself very well. But at the same time, we were in it, not for the money, but to really help patients. And that was the big driver and the differentiator between us and surrounding dispensaries, is we were there to help people.
And as far as a pharmacist helping people with cannabis medicine, how do you see it differing from regular pharmaceuticals?
Great question. And let me just back up a little bit. One of the things that we did for training is we were the first dispensary in the nation to actually work with 2 local colleges of pharmacy. And 4th-year pharmacy students are required to do clinical rotations, 6-week clinical rotations. So what we offered up, me as the preceptor, is to have 4th-year pharmacy students every 6 weeks coming in to do a clinical rotation. And we were the first in the nation to do that in a medical cannabis dispensary. So one of the things that they had to do was give 2 presentations during their 6 weeks. And so we would have a staff meeting every Tuesday morning before we opened, and we would have a pharmacy student get up there and talk about one of the qualifying conditions and the drugs that are used and where medical cannabis could be a better option. And so I had the most educated staff in the state of Illinois. We started doing this in 2016 and continued on until we sold the dispensary. So to answer your questions, how I compare that to pharmaceuticals, I give presentations to pharmaceutical conventions. And it's kind of funny as I think about it, to get up in front of a room full of pharmacists and say, hey, the stuff that you're dispensing sucks, and is dangerous. But I temper that with the idea that, short term, I mean, there's a lot of drugs out there that are very beneficial and very useful. But I said long-term opiates, long-term sleeping pills, long-term, anti-anxiety and depression pills is just not the best idea. And in fact, one of the first presentations I gave was for the National Association of Specialty Pharmacy in Florida. And I always started off my presentations with a short survey. I say, okay, you're all professionals in the audience. Let's see a show of hands for those pharmacists that believe we should have a front seat in this business, in dispensaries. And, several years ago, half the hands would go up and I would say, well, I hope I can change some minds by the end of my presentation. And more recently, I gave a presentation to about 250 pharmacists, locally here in Chicago, and 250 hands went up as far as feeling that the pharmacists should be on the front line of this. So there's been a groundswell of interest.
And how is that, I guess, reverbing back into the people that are writing curriculums and requirements for getting a degree as a pharmacist? Are you seeing any? I know at University of Maryland School of Pharmacy, they have a master's program. Mm-hmm. Are you seeing any of that in any other universities?
I think it's a slow acceptance right now. I know, where I went to pharmacy school, the University of Illinois College of Pharmacy, I couldn't get pharmacy students from there because it was a conflict of interest for them, because they had places in Southern Illinois where they were growing plants and they were getting state funding to do that, maybe even federal funding to do that, for medicinal purposes. And so I think them getting involved with something that was illegal on a federal level stopped them from getting involved with sending students to my dispensary for clinical rotations.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of hoops that the University of Maryland had to jump through in order to get their program to be compliant, because of it's a state organization and so forth. But, I think that's really the challenge, is getting cannabis earlier in the life cycle of people's wellness plans. And I'm glad you mentioned, pharmacy it's not all bad. A lot of people vilify the pharmaceuticals, but they save lives. It's really when it gets into the hands of the patients that aren't always compliant. They don't use it as it says it on the label. And as a prescribing doctor or physician, it can get ahead of you when you're so busy. You just don't have the time to really spend with each patient to make sure that you're keeping on track of this. And this polypharmacy has really gotten out of hand. So,
and many patients that came into our dispensary were on polypharmacy. So they would walk in, and one of the things that we did for every new patient is they would fill out a form similar to the form that you would fill out when you go see a doctor for the first time. A lot of information. And we would sit down with that information, go over their goals of therapy, their family history, their eating habits, their exercise, their diet, and the drugs that they were on, polypharmacy. And I saw so many drug interactions. I mean, sometimes they were in there because they were experiencing pain and discomfort from two drugs that were interacting. You know, serotonin syndrome is very common. So I think what I'm trying to say is that I lost my train of thought, but go ahead.
No, it's really important to show the value of sitting down with a professional before you go to a dispensary. And the universities don't train enough people to understand how cannabis can interact with pharmacy and pharmaceuticals. If you are in a place going into a dispensary, Joseph, most of them are not offering these services that you have, or if they're offering it, it's almost like it has to be seen. It's not forced or pushed. Like, we really recommend you sit down with one of our consultants here. It's not going to be any cost to you, but to really push that. So if you and now so in Maryland, it's now on Saturday it'll be adult use. So if you have 21 and over, you can go in, and there's going to be a lot of volume. There's going to be everyone that's, oh my God, it's finally legal. I can go get, my cannabis and get stoned, but there's going to be a lot of people that want to get some help. And just the one point I wanted to make was it's worth it to sit down with a trained cannabis physician to walk through what your symptoms are, what you're experiencing, because just like you mentioned, cannabis wasn't even a solution for some of these people. If they just would look at the conflict they had with their pharmacies, their pharmaceuticals, that could point to some of the side effects that they're having.
Exactly. And I know some people that went to the University of Maryland College of Pharmacy program, and they really got a great education. But one of the things that I felt was so important, and I don't even know how to do this, but like, for example, someone getting that degree at the University of Maryland, it's great. They're getting a lot of good science, but they're not having the practical experience of working in a dispensary, sitting across from a patient and actually having, that conversation with patients. So I think what really differentiated us is the fact that we were, at the bench level, sitting down, talking to patients, having them start on some cannabis therapy, coming back, tweaking that if necessary, and really getting to a place where we're providing a benefit and helping them with their health condition.
So when you're finishing that process, right? So someone comes in, they sit down, they have a consultation, you're identifying what their challenges are, what their outcomes they're hoping for their cannabis use, maybe some limitations. Then you want to suggest, all right, now you're going to go to the dispensary and purchase some products. The first thing is when you're looking to bring products into your dispensary, do you just pick up anything you get, or what's the process of selecting what you're going to put on your shelves?
Well, we had sort of a unique situation. I would identify, after doing anywhere from 20 minutes to 2-hour consultation with every new patient, is I would select the cannabinoids, the actual molecules that I felt would be beneficial in the ratios of those molecules. And then I would then the patient would walk out of the consultation room, and I'll walk back and I'll talk to one of my product specialists. I say, okay, these are the cannabinoids and the ratios and the doses, the milligram doses that I want this patient to start off on, and the interval of the dosing. And then they would select, because they knew the products, they would select the product that mirrored the recommendations that I was making. And so, not every time we had the right product. Not every time we had the right product 2 months later. Consistency was a big issue. but that's our process. And we probably hit the bullseye 50% of the time as far as helping a patient with the right product when they walked out the door.
That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing that you're able to provide that kind of service. Now, since you sold the dispensary, do they still operate that same way? Do you know, or?
Well, you've probably heard about big MSOs, and and there was a number of reasons why we sold. One is this was right before COVID.
Yeah, one thing, the MSOs, for those people that don't know, they're multi-state operators. It's an acronym for larger companies that buy up dispensaries and they operate in multi-states. That's what an MSO is. So, all right.
Right. And then so we were getting offers right before adult legalization came to Illinois. Plus, and I'm not going to get into details, but I had, beside myself, there was 3 other partners. I had one good partner out of that. And so sometimes the worst ship you can get on is a partnership, but I won't go into any details of that. Yeah. And we got some very attractive offers. Valuations were very high, and it just made sense at that time. Plus I wasn't really sure that I wanted to stick with it. I didn't know COVID was coming, but stick with it for the adult use situation, because in Illinois, what they were allowing is every medical dispensary, and there was 55 of them, to separate their dispensary into medical and adult use, and then have an opportunity to open up another adult use dispensary somewhere. So, that seemed like it was a really cool option, but, a lot of money it would cost to do that, plus saddled with some undesirable partners. It just made sense to get out at that time.
Got it. So so they're operating as they would, like they took their brand and they just kind of took your location, and now they're operating it the way they want to run it. And
yeah, the pharmacy clinical rotation program immediately stopped, and I alerted the 2 colleges of pharmacy, and I said, I hope we'll do this again one day. And then probably within a year, it's probably the same with any company that buys a smaller company. Sometimes the employees don't stick around, and so that's what happened here. The employees were all ran out within a year, and then the company just made a very nice looking, larger, beautiful dispensary with their brand.
Yeah, got it. Well, it's a shame that they lost all those things that was your secret sauce, at least to serving medical patients, because that's a quite a nice process that you did have, not only just from recruiting and bringing the right people in, but ensuring that you have professionals looking out for people as medicine, or cannabis as medicine, because most people think when you say cannabis is medicine, it's a wink, wink. Like, it's like a loophole that we can get this, we can get stoned now and say it's medicine. And most people really don't think that there is a medicinal quality to it.
Well, right. And then, just a good example of that is the governor of Nebraska was up, in front of a group of people standing at a podium with all of these prohibitionist banners on the podium saying cannabis is not medicine, it'll kill your kids. So, this guy is dangerous, but that's, what he believes, and he's putting that out there.
When did you sell the dispensary?
At the end of 2019, beginning of 2020.
Are you itching to get back into the business, or what are you doing now?
Keeping very busy, working with, there's a company called Accountability. They're behind cannabis education and credentialing. I'm on their scientific advisory board along with Dr. Dustin Sulak. You probably heard his name.
Sure.
And so working on something very unique. It's if you Google periodic table marijuana or cannabis, a lot of beautiful things are going to pop up, and they'll be for sale. But it's all colorful strain names, whether they're indica or sativa. Nobody has done the cannabis molecules. So, the THC, the CBD, the CBN, the whatever. So the cannabinoids, the terpenes, and the flavonoids that have medicinal value are what's going to be populated into this new one-of-a-kind periodic table. So I'm working with a company. We're trying to hire a graphic artist, designer to put this together. And then I'm also very involved with doing podcasts on the Pharmacy Podcast Network, and I've got some podcasts set up with prohibitionists, and those are always a lot of fun. And, writing articles, and we just did. There's another group that I'm involved in and we meet monthly at this very chic coffee house in Highland Park, Illinois, called Madame Zuzu's, and it's owned by Billy Corgan, who is the frontman for the Smashing Pumpkins. And so we call ourselves the Chicago Med Psychedelics. And what it's all about is the group is made up of about 9 very educated, very well-known physicians, PhDs, advanced degree nurses, and we discuss all things psychedelics and cannabis. And we were just recently published in High Times magazine.
That's pretty cool. And psychedelics is starting to come up more and more in most of the conversations, even around cannabis. It's now like, right on its heels from, it seems like every conversation I'm in right now, it fits in there. Just so I can understand, and our listeners, how do you see the connection between psychedelics and cannabis? And is cannabis, this is a tough question, is cannabis considered a psychedelic?
No, cannabis is considered a tool in your toolbox, to help with symptoms and things. And there could be a lot more to it. We just need to be able to do the research. And until it's, not against federal law, I think that's going to be impacted. Psychedelics are more of, from what I understand, what I've learned, it kind of can change the chemistry of your brain. So if you're depressed, if you have PTSD, if you've got addictions to alcohol or drugs, or there's a lot of things that a single dose of a psychedelic can actually do, or microdosing, just to kind of feel good if you're depressed, kind of thing. So I think the federal government, and I think there's a lot going on with doing research on psychedelics and mental health disorders.
All right. Well, the pharmaceutical industry, and cannabis, the tobacco industry, alcohol industry, these big established industries all seem to be, vying for a piece of this cannabis business. Do you have any prediction or forward-looking thoughts about where this is going that you'd care to share with us? Or
well, we can use the example of GW Pharma. They came out and they had an FDA-approved product, CBD product, coming from the cannabis plant called Epidiolex. Now, Epidiolex, if you don't have insurance, is about $36,000 a year, and there's 2 indications for childhood seizure disorders. And so, when big pharmaceutical companies get a hold of this, I think there's a tendency to have it cost a lot. And with PBMs, pharmacy benefit managers out there, there's probably a stepwise system in place that you have to try all of these anti-seizure medications before they'll allow you to try Epidiolex and pay for it. So it's hard to say how this is all going to unfold with pharmaceutical companies, but yeah, they are all trying to get into it. And if they can't get into it, they're trying everything to prevent legalization.
Yeah.
Because they're losing money.
Yeah, and they're losing money for what reason? Is it people are getting off they don't have this heavy reliance on the pharmaceuticals?
Well, one of our goals in the dispensary is these people came in with polypharmacy, the drugs that we would want them to taper down and eventually get off of, were the sleeping pills, the pain pills, the antidepressants. I think I mentioned that before. A number of drugs. And so those are the pharmaceuticals that people are steering away from because of long-term bad side effects. And if cannabis is an option and is working for them, they're using cannabis instead.
Yeah. So you can just look for patent searches on cannabis, and there's already, patents that have been filed from pharmaceuticals. But, it's like a plant is a plant, and it's an herb, right? So there's, I'm sure there are pharmaceuticals that were extracted from herbs or plants and compounds that are then isolated and targeted and researched, and then they get their medicine. But for cannabis in general, do you see it being, like it is now, available and, just as a whole plant product, more of an herb and a supplement than anything?
Well, I think you nailed it. When you talk about pharmaceutical drug development, and I used to give presentations on this because I did work for a big pharma at one time in my career. They research single molecule drug entities, and they do the research on that, and that's what they come to market with. Cannabis having 50, 60, 70, 80, 120 different compounds in there, and they all kind of work together, the synergy and all that. I think it would be very difficult for a pharmaceutical company to be able to do the kind of research to come out and say, okay, take this pill that contains 5 milligrams of cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids, and use it for this condition or that condition. I think it's going to be tough.
Yeah, and that's what's been tough from a CBD company, because we can't say, if people come in and they say, Steve, which one's for sleep, which one's for pain, which one's for anxiety, and you can't write that on the package. And although people do, so the advice we always give is the whole endocannabinoid system story, and it's we're not dealing with pharmaceuticals here, so it's more of a finding your perfect dose and the amount to use. When you would recommend cannabis for new patients, do you write off and go say you need to smoke, or are there, because I know a lot of fears that people have about using cannabis, they only think they have to smoke it. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, every patient's different, and deciding on what would be the best route of administration is really up to that conversation we have at the very beginning. People that come in with upper respiratory tract disease, asthma, or emphysema, I don't think smoking is a good idea for any of those patients. And we've got products that are, can be administered through, the skin or under the tongue or an edible, that might be, better for them. And then some patients at the same time go, I never want to smoke that. And so we work with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you don't have to smoke it.
No.
Probably one last question. I know we're taking a lot of time here today, but I just wanted to ask you, when someone is looking for a dispensary, because from what you've expressed just in your experience of building your dispensary and how you treated clients, patients coming in the door, and how you train your staff, not everyone's doing this. What advice do you give to someone that wants to go to a dispensary to find the right one? Are there certain questions they can ask, or certain things that they can do research before they go in to a dispensary so they know that they're working with the right one?
I think my best advice, and certainly there's good people that work in dispensaries, but I think what was mentioned in yesterday's podcast is the margins are very thin, and they can't afford to hire really good, quality people because of the low pay. And so I think the best advice I can give to a consumer is, do your homework before going into a dispensary. Certainly listen to what they have to say, but have a very good idea of, what you want based on the goal you have for using cannabis. If it's a goal that is healthcare wise. So in other words, if you just want to walk in and get high, then yeah, listen to the bud tender, and they're going to recommend the highest THC product. But if you're in there and you're on multiple drugs, I'd say, talk to, do the research online, or talk to a cannabis professional that's got a healthcare degree to guide you through your visit into a dispensary. And plus, and one other thing I would say is, go into a dispensary that has a golden retriever, emotional support dog in there.
Oh, okay.
I'm just saying that.
Ban that in Maryland. I don't think you're allowed to have animals anymore in dispensaries.
Well, I've got a golden retriever, and people would walk in. Sometimes they would, put their affairs in order. They'd be very sad, and we would talk to them, and then we bring our golden retriever in, and it just changes the entire atmosphere. And most people walk out with a smile on their face.
Yeah, that's great.
And when we had an inspector come in when our dog was in there, they were cool with it. So we had 4 inspectors our first year, and every time they were different I was only inspected once when I was in compounding pharmacy, like every 2 years, but we had 4 in the first year. So they were really on top of making sure that we were doing it right.
Would you do it again?
Would I do it again? Yeah, with the right group, with the right location, with the right, right now I'm involved with consulting. We've got, the name of my dispensary was PDI Medical, which stands for Professional Dispensaries of Illinois. Sometimes we would quip and call it, pretty darn incredible, PDI. But we've consulted successfully for a group in Ohio, for another group in PA. I deal with people in Israel and Belize and Hawaii. And so, we're out there, and with the right situation, I would definitely get back into the business. I'm not sure I would be as actively involved, because I worked many hours, many days, and I'm not sure if I'd be up for doing that again, but I would definitely be up for making sure that was run the way that I'd like to see it run.
Yeah, more overseeing versus frontline, really active on the day to day. But it seems like the way you do things, you get involved when you need to. So
Right.
Well, it sounds good. Anything else you wanted to cover today? I could talk to you all day long, but anything else that you wanted to talk to the audience before we shut this down?
I think, again, to reiterate, the most important thing when you walk into a dispensary is, knowing what you want prior to going in there, and certainly listening to, the people that work there, but realizing that they're probably working for one of the big companies, and they're under legal restraint to not really make any recommendations. And so they're not going to be able to tell you too much. And so know what you want when you walk in.
That's great advice. And I agree with that. Make sure you do your own research, be prepared. And Joseph Friedman, we really appreciate you talking today. And if anyone needs to get in touch with you that isn't already connected with you on LinkedIn, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
LinkedIn is a great way to get in touch with me. And I think that's what I'd like to share here.
Okay, great. Sounds good. So just reach out to Joseph. You were very responsive to me when I reached out to you on LinkedIn. So I do appreciate that. And everyone else, thank you for listening. We appreciate you. And until next time.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay, bye.